It's interesting to think about leading Indian modernists really having this strong focus on figuration. Gaitonde, however, was one of the first painters who really started exploring a different format.
Well, there's a really strong heritage of figuration in Indian art, both because of traditional South Asian art and because of the British being in India. So most of the leading modernist artists in India actually started off in a figurative mode, even if they later on veered into abstraction. And certainly Gaitonde was among the first of those artists. By 1959, he's begun to pare down representational forms to their very essence, especially in a work called A Bird and an Egg, which is known as his last representational work. By the early 1960s, he's really beginning to think much more about form and purity.
So we really see the early 60s as this inflection point in a number of modernists at that time, but particularly in Gaitonde's practice.
Gaitonde developed his first series that is dedicated to exploring principles of abstraction as, again, he liked to refer to non-objective painting, a concept that he would actually spend the rest of his life continuing to refine.
So we're really looking at the 1960s then in terms of his move into what we would describe as abstraction.
Very often when people look at Gaitonde's work and see how singular his vision was, they naturally draw connections between his painting and what was happening in the West. But actually, Gaitonde develops these forms even before he travels to New York for the first time in 1964 on a Rockefeller Fellowship. And what I think that this speaks to is a broader cultural zeitgeist of which he was part.
He clearly, as you mentioned, was looking at the abstract expressionist movements and also was influenced by the work of Paul Klee. He then comes back to India.
When Gaitonde was here in New York, he was primarily interested in seeing art, in being in museums, and learning what it was that artists were doing now. And this had one major effect on his practice when he moved back to India. He resettled in Delhi, and instead of painting with a paintbrush, he begins to use a roller and a palette knife, so that you begin to see very different surfaces on his canvases in his abstract works from that time. Subsequently, a number of artists had settled in Delhi also by the mid to late 1960s, and they form a nucleus of abstractionists in India who become extremely influential. Tayyab Mehta comes back from New York in 1969 and resettles in Delhi. And Zarina Hashmi and Nasreen Mohammadi are emerging artists living in Delhi at the time. Gaitonde becomes a mentor for Nasreen, and Zarina has related to me that the extreme collegiality in Delhi at this time was influential for her practice.